Welcome to the Lorecast. I'm Dr. Craig Chalkwist, and we're here to discuss the stories by which we deeply live. I finished the third novel in my Lamplighter trilogy some months back, and I've known for a while that I want to write at least one more book in this assembling Terrania cycle that I've been contributing to for some years now. So, as it stands, there is Tales of Terrania Rising, which you can read for free. It's a story collection at my website, chalkwist.com. You go to /fiction, or you tap on the Works tab, you'll get there either way. So you can read that. I've also included an annotated version, by the way, with some information about where some of the events and history and psychology and philosophy of those stories come from. That was actually the first thing I worked on, that story collection. I then wrote the Lamplighter trilogy, Soul Mapper, Heartlander, and Lamplighter. And I actually recommend reading that first, and then the free collection. And now I'm working on Voices on the Road to Terrania. Terrania being my science fiction-y sounding word for a culture up ahead of us in the future, a world culture where things like inclusion, justice, belonging, abundance, care of each other, and care of the earth are normal. Not utopia, but achievable. Something that we can actually achieve if we can mature enough to get there and if we survive. So anyway, I was working on some stories recently for the Voices collection. And there's a character named Nigel Calvaire who I felt like I owed something to. And before I explain what that is, if you've listened to my other podcasts, you know by now that I'm following Jung in thinking that these imaginal characters aren't just fictional in the sense that we make them up. They run much deeper into the psyche than that. It's actually more that we are receptive to who they are, and then they express themselves through us. So Jung used active imagination, developed active imagination, so he could talk to his own cast of characters. And if you read his red and black books, his journals, you can see that many times he was surprised by what they told him. I actually think that that's the basis, in some ways, not only of a new worldview, but a new religion as well, or a spirituality. And in fact, in my Lamplighter books, there's a religion called Lamplight, hence the name, that's based on imagination. It's a post-patriarchal religion that has no dogma, no doctrine, no priests, none of that stuff, because Lamplighters have outgrown that. So you can read about it in there. So back to Nigel. When I started writing that third novel in the series, in the trilogy, rather, he was the first one who came to me. I had a pretty vivid image of what he looked like and his personality, and I thought that he was going to be the narrator. I knew the novel was going to focus on Mariam Najjar, the spiritual head of Lamplight, but I wouldn't feel comfortable writing something from a feminine perspective for several reasons. A couple of them are, one, I'm not sure I have the skill as a writer to do that, in spite of all the time I've spent honing my skills at writing fiction. And another consideration is the appropriateness of doing that, which is a whole other argument I'm not going to get into here. So what I decided was that there would be a male character who would admire Miriam and be in her inner circle and talk about her and her struggles and Lamplight struggles in a fascist situation about 60 years from now. So Nigel was the first to show up, but I realized that there was another character who would be a more appropriate witness to what was happening. Because Nigel, for all that I like him, is very short with words, and I couldn't see him writing a whole book. It just didn't fit his character. He's way too curt for that. So I did include him in the book. He's important, although he's not a major character, I would say. But he's one of several who are close to Miriam. So he's been waiting around for a while, and I was out walking the other day and thinking about the next story I wanted to write for Voices on the Road to Terrania, and he came to mind, and I thought, yeah, it's time for him to have a story. He can at least live long enough to narrate a short story. He can do that much. So in active imagination, I ran it by him, and he agreed, and he liked the idea. And I told him what I had in mind, and he said, well, we'll see. So we started, and what I had in mind for him initially was that this would take place enough decades after the third novel in the trilogy that he would be much older and kind of chafing at retirement because he's an active spirit. He's a soldier, for one thing. He's a Marine of the coastal government, was a Marine. And he was that before he worked for Miriam, and he's done all kinds of interesting things over the years. And I imagined into where he was at the time I'm writing the story. My sense was that retirement was a huge issue for him, which it is for a lot of men under arms. I've worked with a lot of veterans over the years at varying ages, from very young to very old. And in fact, I counseled, or rather witnessed, didn't really do therapy with him, but in my therapy intern days, I sat with one of the men who had fought on the islands in World War II in the Pacific Theater, and him weeping as he told me about what it was like to lose his best friend and then come home and lose his wife. And all I really did was listen and feel with him. And he died not long after that. So there's a lot of veteran stories running around in my heart. And some of those stories come from my birth father, who was a Marine, fought in Korea. Came back with very bad post-traumatic stress. So I was talking over with Nigel my idea for the story and starting it. And his comment, we'll see, turned out to be a bit of irony, which I think he was fully aware of. Because I was going to write maybe a 5 or 6 page Word document length story. I always forget how much that comes to in book length, but when it actually goes into a paperback, for instance. But I started on it, and his issue of not wanting to retire, but also being physically kind of tired at his age, and if he was in his 40s in the novel, so now he's in his 70s, 80s, something like that. There are longevity treatments available for everybody at this time. They're actually on the drawing board right now. So human lifespans are going to be much longer. Not too many years from now, it sounds like. So he had the benefit of that medicine. His wife did too. I didn't know he had a wife until he told me about her. And he didn't in the novel. He was single then. So my first go at this was that the character who is the protagonist of Soul Mapper, namely Lucas Murdoch, was missing. And Nigel comes out of retirement to look for him. And my imagining was that it was kind of a setup for him to be nudged into a sort of mentoring position where members of an organization dedicated to peace, a global organization, set up by friends of his, founded by friends of his, needed him. They needed his wisdom. Some of the most eloquent and convincing speakers about the need for peace are military people and ex military people. They know so well what war is like. And in this story, there's a number of quotations by various great captains, as they're called in the military, generals who are famous, speaking against war, including Grant and Lee and a number of others. So they really want him to spend some time with these younger people, telling them about the importance of their work and teaching them things. And so Nigel's done some teaching, but he's very introverted, and he's got this idea about himself that he's not a good teacher. He doesn't want to teach anymore. And so he's conflicted because he says, well, I just want to be at home and mend my fences. I live on a ranch. I want to take care of my horses and my sheep, and but he's bored. and his wife is going nuts because he's bored. So she realizes better than he does that he needs to be active somehow, even if he's too old to do strenuous physical stuff anymore. So that's what I had set up for him. But when I started writing it, I realized almost immediately that Lucas actually had been kidnapped, and that the person who calls Nigel and his wife Ellie, when they live in Montana, so they're on their way to Bozeman to pick up some printer supplies. And Lucy Joe, who's the wife of Lucas Murdoch, calls him and says, basically, help, I don't know what to do. He's missing. He was on assignment and he's missing. So I won't tell you any more of this story because it would spoil it, but that was the entrance into a much longer telling than I had planned. It actually turned out to be 16 Word document pages. And when I got to the end of it, again doing active imagination with Nigel, he said, yeah, see? Kind of like, told you so. Now, in terms of my own creative process, I'm doing with maybe a little bit more consciousness what I think all writers and artists and other creators do. And I say a little more consciousness just because of my training and background, Jungian studies included. So if you ask most authors, most fiction authors, they'll say, yeah, I talk to my characters, but they don't have that deeper understanding that their characters are actually autonomous to some extent. So in working with mine, when I say my characters, it's always in quotes around the my or mine, because they're their own. I'm open to what they suggest, and I feel like the stories go much better and deeper and twistier because of it. What I had planned for Nigel, I think, was kind of boring. He was going to find out at the end of the story that, oh, Lucas wasn't actually captured. This was just a ruse to get me in front of an audience full of people who want to hear from me. And then, oh, I find out that I really like being kind of the wise old man figure for them. And yes, I do have a lot to say because of my military experience and so on. And then now he's happy and his wife is happy and he found something useful to do. He made the transition, right? But what I actually wrote is so much cooler than that. If I do say so myself. What I co-wrote with Nigel, actually, let me put it that way, and other characters too. And Lucy Joe originally was just going to be kind of a trigger point for all this. And as I was writing, she kept showing up more and more. And I thought, yeah, you should show up more because I haven't said much about you. I introduced her in Soul Mapper, and then she became the head of an organization that slows down technological innovation so that it can be properly vetted before it gets released to the public. Because that whole process has been so disastrous under what I call male fist capitalism, the largely unregulated kind that's bought and paid for. So she founds that organization, but she doesn't have a lot of space in my stories. And I thought, well, that should change. I'm going to bring her in more. And I'm actually going to make her the pivot in some ways on which this story turns. So you have to read it to find out. It'll be probably, I'm recording this at the beginning of January. So it's going to be at least a few more months before I finish these stories, and then I have to edit them, and then I will publish them online the way I have my other books. Publishing them at Amazon, which was its original purpose. So it'll be a while before the story's out. It's called The Quest, because I think of Nigel as a kind of Lancelot figure. So that's his personal myth, Lancelot. And Ellie is short for Elaine. So if you know the stories, you know what fun that is. But the two of them turning into a happier ending. Also, as I like to do in my stories, I wanted to turn the hero's journey upside down a bit. And Nigel was not only good with that, he wanted that too. And so he does some really interesting things in the stories. A few heroic and risky things, but it goes in a somewhat different direction. So let me give you one more example of how I talk to the characters and collaborate with them in my fiction. This is a briefer example. The character Brenda appears in Heartlander, the second novel of the second Lamplighter novel, and she's also in the third novel as well. So she gets some decent play, especially in Heartlander, and she comes back for a story that I just started writing. And in this story, Eran, Eran, who is the power, the archetypal power of all the forms of Eros throughout the cosmos, human forms, non-human forms, animate, not animate, the force that holds everything together. He disappears. His influence doesn't go away entirely, or the whole universe would fall apart, but it diminishes. And so Eros all over the place suddenly dies down a bit, and the energy, the motivation, the instinct, the lust for life, all of that starts to fade a bit. And so the other powers don't know where he is. And Brenda doesn't either, but Brenda is, because of her personal myth, is close to Aloere, the power who is in some ways close to Erin. You could think of their relationship as similar to Venus and Cupid, Aloere and Erin. And she does know what happened to him. And so Brenda does a mini quest to find out what happened, why it happened, and what the deeper meanings of it is. So that'll be an interesting story. I don't really know where it's going to go yet. I've started writing it. I've written maybe a page and a half. And so we'll see. That one I'm writing third person omniscient. So I'm watching what all happens with Brenda, with other characters in the stories, as a witness to see where it's all going. So I hope this is informative, not only in terms of accessing your own creativity, but in bringing the creativity to greater force in how you live. Because each of us has a whole cast of characters, some fictional. They come from films, from novels, other fictional media, and some from other places. Many have a mythic structure. So the more myth we read, the more easily we recognize who those characters are. And they advise us. They want us to have a conscious relationship with them. And it's kind of a relief, actually, when we have to make the big decisions in life, to know that there's a chorus standing behind us and that each one of them has a different perspective on the issue, such that we shouldn't overly identify with any one of them, because our job as conscious beings is to mediate those different voices and then make our own decisions. Jung warned us against leaving anything up to any archetype. We're so easily possessed by them. And that's one of the themes of the entire cycle, that humanity's in a state of archetypal possession, and we're trying to get free so that we can build something beautiful together. Meanwhile, try accessing your own cast of characters creatively and see what they have to say about the direction you're heading in. Thanks.